Our gospel reading this morning is taken from the Gospel of Jesus Christ according to Matthew. And I'm reading now from chapter 25, verses 31 through 40. Listen for the word of God for you. When the Son of Man comes as King, and all the angels with him, he will sit on his royal throne, and the people of all the nations will be gathered before him. Then he will divide them into two groups, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the righteous people at his right and the others at his left. Then the king will say to the people on his right, "Come, you that are blessed by my Father, come and possess the kingdom which has been prepared for you ever since the creation of the world. I was hungry and you fed me, thirsty and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger and you received me in your homes, naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you took care of me, in prison and you visited me." The righteous will then answer him, "When, Lord, did we ever see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you a drink? When did we ever see you a stranger and welcome you in our homes, or naked and clothe you? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?" The king will reply, "I tell you, whenever you did this for one of the least important of these followers of mine, you did it for me." You know, since the day that I was ordained as a minister in the United Church of Canada, I have had a certain fear. You see, I'm responsible as a minister for preaching God's gospel good news. I'm responsible as a minister to testifying to the love that God has for all God's children everywhere in the world. And the fear that I have, folks, is this. It is that one day, intentionally or not, I will preach judgment instead of love, or division instead of unity. And as a result of this, help create walls that do nothing but separate God's people from one another. Walls that separate us from them, those on the inside from those on the outside. The fear that I have is that in my preaching, I could just as easily lead people down the garden path and away from God's love as I could lead them to it. And as I thought about what my message might be this morning, set within the context of that fear, I was reminded of an interview I once saw on television on CNN's Larry King, when he had a guest host on this particular night. And the host was Canada's comedian, Martin Short, dressed as one of his characters, Jiminy Glick, in case you know him. Well, that night, Jiminy Glick interviewed half a dozen people, and one of them was Bill Maher. Now, Bill Maher used to host the program Politically Incorrect until the network pulled the show after some unacceptable remarks he made following the 9/11 attacks in New York City. He still has, however, a show on HBO. I don't know if you get a chance to see it. At any rate, Jiminy Glick, having stuffed his face with donuts, said to Bill Maher in his whiny little voice, "Now, Bill, you don't believe in God, do you?" And to his surprise, and mine, and I'm sure many others, Bill Maher answered, "As a matter of fact, I do." "You do?" was the incredulous response. "Then why do you say all those nasty things you do about religion and about religious people. It's this way, Bill said. I don't have any trouble with God, but I do have trouble with those who presume to speak for him. I think I know what Bill was referring to. We see it all the time. We hear it all the time. I certainly cannot comment on those who speak for other faiths, but I can comment on those who speak for ours. Maybe Bill Maher was referring to the Jerry Falwells of this world, who, in presuming to speak for God, proclaim that AIDS is God's punishment for those engaged in homosexual or out-of-marriage relationships. Yet how does that answer those who get the HIV/AIDS virus from hepatitis? And how does that answer the sorrow of the millions of children in Africa who have lost parents and siblings, aunts and uncles and grandparents to this dreaded disease? Maybe Bill was referring to the Pat Robertsons of this world, who, in presuming to speak for God and commenting on a school board's decision in a small community in Pennsylvania not to allow the teaching of intelligent design alongside the theory of evolution in the school science classes, said that if a natural disaster hits that area, the community should not expect God to answer their prayers for help, because God won't. Maybe Bill was referring to the Jimmy Swaggarts of this world, who, in presuming to speak for God and condemning those whose lives are full of sin, was caught literally with his pants down and fell flat on his faith. Maybe Bill Maher was referring to those who, in presuming to speak for God, tell us that poverty and sickness and trouble are a result of sin in our lives. That they come to live with us because the devil is the author of them. And if we'll just get right with God, miracles will burst into our lives from the storehouses of God's mercy, and we'll find wealth, and our health will return, and our troubles will become a memory. Get this little vial of miracle spring water. Get this little green prayer cloth. Believe in God for your miracle, and the miracle will come. But for too many wonderful people of faith, the miracle does not come. Maybe Bill Maher was referring to the many who, in presuming to speak for God, are so absolutely sure, it seems, about absolutely everything, that they leave little room for other people's uncertainty and for different understandings. So little room, it seems, that they forget the wise words of Alfred Lord Tennyson, who wrote, "There is more faith, believe me, in honest doubt than there is in half the creeds." So little room, it seems, that they forget the wise words written by Henry Haskins, that we should treat the other person's faith gently, because it is all he has to believe in. When some people presume to speak for God, it seems to me There's too much judgment and too little grace. Too much self-righteousness and too little righteousness. No two human beings are the same, right? We all know that. Only some, I think, need reminding. We're all on a journey, a wonderful faith journey. And our journeys take us down different roads, each with its own twists and turns. Our journeys, each of us, are filled with joy and sorrow, wonder and disappointment, questions and doubts, faith, maybe not enough of it. So when this preacher speaks for God, knowing that somebody's listening, what can he say that will in the end open the way for people to draw nearer to the heart of God? That will in the end help us all on our journey and give our lives meaning. And if it's true that we're all looking for a life that has meaning, then where is that meaning to be found? This is where. In a life that finds its fullness in God. In a life that is on intimate terms with God. In a life that discovers in every moment, in every place, and in every circumstance, God's presence and God's grace. Meaning is found in the heart of God, as Jesus reveals that heart. In the heart of God that assures us that we are loved. Loved beyond measure. Loved for ourselves. Loved no matter what. Loved wherever our journey takes us. I'm convinced that to know that we are loved by God is where we'll find meaning. And there's a second place where I think we'll find meaning. And that is in giving our life to something that will outlast our life. In giving ourselves in response to God's love for us, in loving service to others. To find faith in the God who loves us. And then following in faith where that love leads us. That is what gives life its meaning. Does that make sense? And usually love leads us to a life given in service to others. Jesus' invitation to follow him, his call to us, we hear these terms, always leads us on that kind of journey. In other words, the glory of the faith is not just the change it can make in us, but the change it can make in other people's lives because of us. That's where meaning is found. I'm convinced. It isn't about prosperity and power and health and miracles. It's about the meaning that's found in being loved and loving others. And here is a great truth that I know. All the faith proclaimed means nothing if we don't become like Jesus, non-judgmental and loving. All the faith proclaimed pales in the face of a loving faith lived out. All of the love professed means nothing if we don't act like Jesus, non-judgmental, respectful, and inviting. All the love professed pales in the face of love and understanding given life in our lives. For me, that's what it means to live with Christ's Spirit reigning in our hearts. It means giving ourselves to a cause or a purpose outside of ourselves. That is where life's meaning is found. Living with Christ's Spirit reigning in our hearts means giving ourselves in love to the lives of others, in the name of the one whose love gives meaning in our lives. Living with Christ's Spirit reigning in our hearts means breaking down walls and building bridges. It means living with more questions than answers, more queries than certitudes, more understanding than judgment, more gift than hurt, more joy than fear, more people inside our circle of love than outside. That's what it means, I think, to living with the Spirit of Christ reigning in our hearts. That's what it means to live a wonderful life. That's what we celebrate on Reign of Christ Sunday, today. So friends, let's journey together. And as we do, on our hearts and on our houses be the blessing of God. In our coming and in our going be the peace of God. In our life and in our believing be the love of God. At our end and at our new beginning be the arms of God to welcome us and to bring us home.